Hello and welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. On this episode, we'll be reviewing one of the Pittsburgh patriarchs. He's maybe a little bit before my time, but some of the older folks definitely remember him. And if you're younger, you're definitely something you want to listen to. He's a person that probably one of the biggest sports figures in Pittsburgh sports history, if I could say Pittsburgh one more time. He's he's a founder and a patriarch of the Steelers organization. And he really was more known for his extraordinary personal skills and a general all-around good person more than, the football championship, although he did keep the team afloat during the lean years. And that would be the Chief, Art Rooney Sr. If you wonder why there are plays written about him, there's been a couple books. He's pretty well celebrated not just in the Pittsburgh area, but nationally by many national media types. He's definitely considered one of those people that, definitely made sports what it was, not just in Pittsburgh, but, he made the NFL the juggernaut that it is today.
Yeah, Steve, it's interesting. He is a almost like a mythical figure in Pittsburgh, and you just grow up just knowing who he is and who his family is, and you see there's pictures of him with a cigar in his mouth, and so it's interesting when you actually delve into, okay, who was he? What's his background? What did he actually do here? And that's what we're going to get into.
Yeah, so to begin, he was born to a family that immigrated from Ireland, and I think they ended up on the north side, and I do believe his father owned a bar on the north side, and that's where, the Chief kind of cut his teeth there. And as he got older, he graduated high school. He was a boxer. He was very athletic. He played some football, but in Maine, his biggest thing was boxer. And he ended up barnstorming around the country, him and his, I think he had an older brother. And they would barnstorm around the country. And I guess back in those days, that was, back in the teens, 19s, the carnival would come to town and they would have a guy like you ever watch the movie Diggstown? Kind of like that, where there's this big guy and he's like, if you can go 2 rounds with him, you win $20. And the Chief was one of the guys that you would go, 2 rounds with, but he knew how to box. And he did that for a while. And he was kind of like a puncher. He would get in close and kind of duke it out. And he took a lot of punches. And as he kept going on this barnstorming tour, one of the older boxers said, well, you come from a good family and, you're pretty smart, this isn't the life for you. And he realized, he kind of saw the handwriting on the wall that he wasn't going to become, a big name boxer. And that if he kept going on this, by the time he had reached his old age, just from, as many boxers do, just, you just lose your kind of sense because you get hit in the head too many times. So what he did was he came back to Pittsburgh and he ended up attending college. He went to Temple on an athletic scholarship. And then he finished up his education at Georgetown University. So he was a pretty smart guy. And that would definitely, I'm sure that education would benefit him later as he owned several different businesses. And knowing boxing, he became a boxing promoter. He would promote fights often around the area. I don't know of any big name fights he pressed, but he was friends with famous boxers from Pittsburgh and such. He also owned a semi-pro football team named the Hope Harveys, and that was well before the NFL. He got into the NFL. But his main love was definitely baseball and horse racing. And this kind of goes back into the personality of the Chief here. Was he liked that because, baseball plays almost every day, and the horse track you can go every day. They're always racing horses. And I think he liked that interpersonal interactions with people. And he was a pretty good horse handicapper. He knew how to play the ponies. He won a lot of money at the track, but he put in a lot of work, like a lot of people that do that, He would get up at 5 a.m. and he would go down and actually clock the horses at the track, and do his research and stuff. This is the days before TV and the internet. All you had was radio and the newspaper. So you really had to get out there and put your work in. And that was definitely something he enjoyed and excelled at.
Yeah, it's interesting because he was really into sports, obviously, and boxing, and he had a love of sports. And instead of continuing to play sports, he took his sort of business savvy and turned that into, he could still be involved in sports, but at a management kind of level, like you said, owning the semi-pro team and promoting boxing matches, and then even managing the horse races and figuring those out. He decided to use sort of his brain instead of his athletic talent.
Yeah, and obviously, like I said, that advice from going out boxing, and I guess he kind of, if you aren't a top draw boxer, you aren't going to make enough money, and how many punches do you have in you? I think he kind of was smart enough to see the handwriting on the wall, so to speak. He did get into politics with a gentleman named Bill Coyne, who was one of the top Republican leaders of this era. Another place where he probably developed his, from the bar and, social contact, like that was really his biggest asset. Was he knew how to treat people, and he had a philosophy that we'll get into that served him well for his whole life, and probably would serve most of us well. I'd like I myself, I love to read biographies, especially biographies of people that are successful or that I admire, because sometimes you can learn some life lessons and kind of incorporate some of their successes into yours. And, he was just of that older generation. I knew them through my wife's grandmother. It was just kind of like that older generation kind of had the way of treating people that I really miss. And I hope to, I guess the only way to do that is to kind of pass it on to the younger generation, but not to get too far off there. Like I said, he was a very successful horse handicapper. According to his son, Art Jr., who would be Dan's younger brother, they had like 5 kids, and they're all named like Art, Dan, Tim, and John. So it gets confusing. He took a bet from, I guess, Tim Mara, who owned the Giants, was the original owner of the Giants. They took a bet for like $50K, or it paid out $50K on the horses. And Tim Mara didn't have the money right then, so Art let him pay him off slowly or eventually. And I guess Tim Mara always felt like after that, the Maras and the Rooneys have been a very close-knit families, not just in the NFL, but I think there's been marriages between the families and such. So,
the actress, if you've ever heard of Rooney Mara, the actress, she was in like the Social Network and some other movies. That she's part of that family. That's her name. Yeah. Rooney Mara is Rooney and Mara, the two families. That's why she's named that. I think she's Dan's niece. Her sister too is an actress. So yeah, those two families have definitely been close, and now are joined at the hip via marriage in some cases.
And just to keep with the horse racing, because the chief did own horses, he had a great day at a track called Saratoga, which is in New York, I believe. And according to rumors, he won over $250,000. Now, I'm not sure. I don't know if that's in today's money or back then money. Maybe if it's back then money, that's a lot. That's like millions of dollars. And according, they say, I guess, when you have your race card, the chief hit just about every race on that card that day. He picked the winners, or, however he bet. So, like I said, the chief was a great horse handicapping. Horse racing was definitely his first love, and what he definitely excelled at over those early years. So we kind of went over this in the Steelers' dark ages a little bit, but in 1933, once again, he has these interpersonal connections and relationships with politicians and other people, and he buys into the NFL because he realizes that from his political connections that they're going to repeal the blue laws, so they'll be able to play football on Sundays, which starts his relationship with the NFL and the Steelers. And boy, at first it was a rocky relationship for all involved. He got into fights with his coaches over I don't know what, but they got mad at him, and so I know in the one coach, they pushed the furniture to the edges of the office, and I guess these Joe Bach was a tough guy. He wasn't like no pushover, but Rooney, drawing on his barnstorming days of boxing, totally just beat the heck out of the coach so bad that the players didn't respect Joe Bach anymore because he got beat up by the chief. I just can't imagine stuff like this. I mean, only back then in that generation. I mean, I could just never imagine that a player and a coach and an owner would literally have just like a boxing match in there. You know, could you imagine that?
Yeah, there was a time when you were sort of more accountable for your words, right? You couldn't just go on Twitter and call somebody names like you can today. I think back then that got you into fights, into physical fights, and just a different time. Hard to like criticize or whatever that, because it's just a different time, right? Very different time.
It wasn't like a total fist fight either. They actually got like boxing gloves and set up like an area to do it. It wasn't like they just like, okay, we're just going at it. They jumped over the desk. They actually had like for real like sparring match, I guess. And
so kind of like challenging him to a duel, kind of like that,
yeah.
Only without the pistols.
Yeah. Nice. My honor has been assuaged, I guess. Joe's wasn't too much because I guess he didn't last too much longer with the Steelers after that. I had a great quote, and this is just the example of how he treated a player. He never had a player he didn't like, and he thought every player he had was a star. It may be one of those examples. I don't know if there's more of a Bobby Lane story or what, but either Bobby trusted the chief or was just so cocky that he signed a blank contract and left Art Rooney to fill the details. Tell him, pay me what you think I'm worth. And I'm sure the chief was more than fair with that contract, because I mean, he did have a history of paying people. Like he paid Byron White, that running back they drafted, like the most money that they had ever paid a rookie. So he had tried to pay people and buy good players, but those early years it definitely didn't work out. And he was definitely a prankster. Like he would definitely like just mess with people and stuff. Once before a preseason game between the Steelers and Bears, him and his son Dan, his oldest son, who would become later president of the Steelers, were walking down the hallway, I guess in the hotel where the Bears were staying, and George Halas was giving this like real fiery pep talk to the Bears. Oh, we're going to beat the Steelers, and da-da. And so Dan goes up and knocks on the door, and George Halas opens and said, "Oh, Dan, you're in the wrong place. Your father's room somewhere else." And Dan says, "Oh, please take it easy on the Steelers. Don't beat my dad's team too bad," like in his little kid voice, and like all the team laughed and stuff. And it was just another example of Art messing with the opposition there. He definitely in his even his older days, I guess, liked to mess with people. And to beat off in the exhibition game, the Steelers beat the Bears for the first time 10-9. And after the game, George Halas stated that Dan Rooney was the Steelers' best offensive weapon that day. So I guess it had an effect on the Bears. They did take it easy on them in a preseason game.
Yeah, that's kind of a funny story. And like, this is all stuff that you just wouldn't see today, right? You wouldn't see an owner of an NFL team sending his young child into the other team's room and everybody having a good laugh about it. It's just things were, it was like you said, his personality, and then also the fact that the league was smaller and much more tight knit, because everybody was really, a lot of those owners, Halas and Rooney and Maris, they were trying to survive year to year more than they were even maybe trying to win championships.
Yeah, that's definitely something to be said, that there was definitely more of a camaraderie between the owners than there is now. I mean, there wasn't millions and millions of dollars. And even the chief says that later, that once TV came in, it's just like all these other people came in. You had sports psychologists and trainers and TV executives and stuff. It definitely was such a different, smaller, tight-knit community, when the money maybe wasn't as good. So you kind of lost that when you got the money. You kind of lost that tight knit family feel, I guess. To his credit, the chief, he did find creative solutions during the war years. He combined with the Philadelphia Eagles and the Chicago Cardinals when they didn't have enough players to field a team. So, I mean, say what you will, they did not win a lot in those early years, but I think, like you said, just surviving day to day was probably winning, and putting enough people in the seats to pay the salary. That was one of the quotes Art Rooney said was, the biggest thrill wasn't winning on Sunday, but meeting the payroll on Monday. So definitely something to be said. Sometimes you're just trying to survive.
Hard to imagine, given like where the NFL is now, that you would even have to think about that. There was a time where you even had to think about that.
Yeah. Another great thing, he formed allies. We talk about the Maras, but another person he knew he came into the league with was Bert Bell, who was one of the owners and then commissioners of the league. He owned the Eagles. And one of the things Bert Bell did was and I think Rooney kind of got on board with this, was like in baseball, the Yankees see the Pirates as their competition, or the Yankees see the Red Sox as their competition, which they are on the field. But when you're looking at the overall sports landscape and getting people to spend their money to see your product, the Yankees aren't competing against the Red Sox. The Yankees are competing against the Giants and the Jets. And I don't think sometimes bigger market teams realize that. And I think that was something that maybe that was revolutionary, and that was part of the reason the NFL has seen its success go far above other sports. And so one of the big things that Bert Bell and him did was they set up the current draft, which I guess teams didn't do that. Like the best team would just kind of sign whoever the best players were available. And if you had enough money to sign them, you would sign them. Whereas now there was a draft system, and the team that finished last would get the first pick of a player coming into the league, so they would get more talent. And it really was a revolutionary thing. And you see that in other leagues that don't necessarily, that finally caught on to that you're only really, it's kind of like a chain. You're only really as strong as your weakest link. If you don't have fans in Pittsburgh and Tampa and other places, your league just isn't going to thrive as well as it could.
Yeah, could you imagine what the NFL would look like if you didn't have a draft where the worst team got to pick first?
Well, I think it would look like the Premier League. I know you're not a big soccer fan, but it would look like the Premier League, like soccer leagues do. Whereas the soccer teams just, you have like in the English, you have 6 teams that have all the money, and in Spain you have like 2 or 3, and that those teams have all these money, and they just sign whoever they want. And if you're some little team that's not quite there, you never even get a chance at the best players.
Yeah, and the Steelers would have been in that category for sure had they not implemented a draft.
It's one of the more revolutionary concepts, and it just shows that there's a different way of looking at the league, and I think other leagues have finally caught on to that.
Well, yeah, everybody has a draft now. I mean, all the major sports leagues do have that same style of draft too, where the worst team gets to pick first, or at least there's some kind of lottery where the set of worst teams.
The Penguins kind of ruined that with the tanking. You at least get a certain percentage of top draft picks,
right?
And it's funny to hear sometimes like the big market teams complain about it still. Like you'll hear a reporter every once in a while, why does Miami get this pick? It's like, okay, just because you make all the money doesn't mean, you get every little advantage here.
Well, those early NFL owners, like, to your point, that was one of their big things is the league has to succeed as a whole. It can't just be 1 or 2 teams being successful. And so there's a lot of unselfishness with things like that. Later on, the revenue sharing, if they didn't have stuff like that, the league would not have been successful. It would have been a handful of teams that were good and nobody else was. And then nobody would have gone to the games in those smaller towns where the teams weren't very good, and those teams would have faded away. So it required a lot of unselfishness from people like the Chief and his contemporaries to build up the NFL to what it is today.
Yeah, and in researching this, I didn't realize the Giants, like the Maras, had a tough time in New York. Like there was that AAF where Cleveland came from. Like they had a couple of teams in New York that the Giants had to fight for fans and fight off for years to get a fan base from. So it wasn't like, I always just thought, oh, well, the Giants, they just kind of just showed up and always had a fan base. No, like the Maras, they really had to fight to keep their team afloat because there was a lot of other rival leagues. So I'm sure that led to it too, thinking of the league as a whole instead of just, are the Giants going to survive, So, I mean, it definitely is a lot of unselfishness, but, it definitely benefits. Look at what it's done for the NFL. Just another example of the Chief and like I have a great quote, he has at the end here. One day after Walt Kiesling, I think it cut Johnny Unitas. They ran into Johnny Unitas. He was still in town, but he hadn't gone down to Baltimore to, get signed and become the rest is history kind of moment. But they ran into Johnny Unitas. It was in the car, and the Chief rolled down the window and just said, "Oh, hey, Johnny, sorry it didn't work out. And, good luck. I hope you have good luck wherever you end up." And I mean, that's just like, one of those things that, you just got cut by an employer, but, at least they're like human about it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of course, the infamous story at the end of the playoff game in Oakland, the final payoff, the Chief finally gets his playoff win. He's in the elevator and he misses the immaculate reception, which wasn't but he did find out when could you imagine going in, the difference in his attitude probably from when he went in that elevator to when he came out down in the basement at Three River Stadium. He was definitely shocked when he came out and they won.
And I think the reason he went down early was because he wanted to be in the locker room for when the team came in to sort of, tell them, hey, good season. Don't be disappointed. You guys did great. Like, I think he went down there to encourage the players. So, like, that was the reason he was in the elevator. He wasn't just, like, going to get a drink or something. He actually wanted to get down there ahead of time so he could be there when the players got in the locker room.
Yeah. And he didn't meddle with the team like, you hear owners call this play or, cut this player. He would, he would just kind of let the coaches handle that, which is probably smart on his part once he got the right coach. But he definitely was a personable owner. And the players, like I said, one of the more enigmatic players that ever played for the Steelers, Terry Bradshaw, loved the Chief. And, the Chief called him the Blonde Bomber. And after the first Super Bowl win, the Chief called Terry Bradshaw and said, "You made me a big shot. I can't go anywhere. Everybody's recognizing me now." I guess he liked to keep it and he liked his anonymity there, and he lost a little bit that with some success.
Yeah. It says a lot about the Chief that Terry Bradshaw is one of those guys who's he says different things at different times. He's all over the map when he talks about different things. Anytime I've ever heard him talk about Art Rooney, including his Hall of Fame induction, it's just with just complete reverence and admiration and love for this guy that was the owner.
Yeah, and that's the type of influence, type of person that he was. Like I said, he let the Chief let his son run the team. He didn't interfere with Dan when he moved out of the way and Dan took over in the late 60s. Even in the 80s when Dan fired his younger brother and Art's son, he said to Art Jr., said, "Dan's running the team. It's his decision. We have to abide by it." And that takes a lot of fortitude, I imagine, especially in the family. That family stuff can be tough.
Yeah, we talked about this in a previous episode, how, if you want to look at a turning point for the Steelers, it's really when he hands over control to Dan. And we talked about Bill Austin, the coach before Chuck Noll. Art had hired him. So as great of a guy as Art was, he wasn't all that great at running the football team. And he hired Bill Austin as the coach because Vince Lombardi said, "Oh, this guy's one of my assistants. I can vouch for him. He's the best." And Dan said, "Okay, well, why don't we bring him in for an interview? We'll bring 6 other guys in for an interview, then we'll evaluate who's the best because that's what you're supposed to do." And Art said, "Oh, don't worry, I already hired him because Vince said he was good and Bill Austin turned out to be a terrible coach." And so when Dan took over, he started doing things like that. And when they hired Chuck Noll, it was a much more involved process. And this time they got the right guy, obviously. Chuck Noll went on to win 4 Super Bowls. But, a good leader does that. A good leader knows when to step out of the way and maybe let somebody that has a little bit more acumen or a little bit more skills in a certain area take over. And sometimes when you do that, you have to put aside your ego a little bit, right? You have to put aside your need for control. And that's what Art did. So, I mean, that's a big deal that he let Dan take over. And I don't think the Steelers have the success that they do if he doesn't make that decision.
And I think, too, it made nice that he combined that with, his overall philosophy, which we'll get into here, which I've been kind of teasing it, is Art Rooney, we've all heard the golden rule, treat everybody as you want to be treated. Well, Art kind of put his own little spin on it there. He said, treat everybody the way you'd like to be treated, give them the benefit of the doubt, but never let anyone mistake kindness for weakness. So he kind of took a little bit of the golden rule and put a little north side on it there. It's okay, treat everybody how you wanted. And he'd greet everybody from the groundskeepers to Pete Rozelle exactly the same. He talked to everybody on the team. If, you're just a little person to, the most important person in the league, it was Pete Rozelle probably at that time. So that was definitely something that benefited him well and made nice and Dan too kind of saw that and took those lessons from his father and incorporated with his football skills. And that definitely has made for a very successful organization.
Yeah, there's stories of him talking to the cleaning people at the offices of the Steelers and things of that nature. He was just that kind of guy. It didn't matter. It didn't matter, who you were. It wasn't like, hey, I'm the owner. It was just, you're a human being. I'm a human being. Let's have just a conversation. He never really saw himself apparently as above anybody else.
Yeah, and he definitely rubbed off on Dan that way because remember Dan used to let Ike Taylor sleep in his office. And they used to say that about you could go into Dan's office and you couldn't do that. Like in other organizations, you weren't going to walk into Al Davis's office or, whoever, Carl Rosenblum or whoever owns the Colts back, you weren't going to do that in other organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Later years, some of the stuff he did, he helped bring the Penguins. They were a minor league Hornets before the 67 expansion in the NHL. And he helped facilitate them becoming a professional franchise. And he was part owner of the Penguins during the early years of the 70s. Funny thing.
That's an interesting story. The Penguins had their 50th anniversary a couple of years ago. And they did this really good documentary. I think you can still go out and watch it on their website or on YouTube. And they talked about the founding of the team, and that's a story I'd never heard before. When the NHL expanded, they had 6 teams, and they were going to add 6 teams. But in Pittsburgh was one of the candidates, the Penguins, and Art was friendly with some of the guys, the NHL executives or whoever that were making the decisions, and he actually called and said, "Look, you should admit Pittsburgh is one of the teams." And the guy, the gentleman that was going to be the owner, he said, "I know this guy," and he actually, you could legitimately say that the Penguins maybe don't exist if he doesn't intervene. That's a legitimate thing you can say, and I never even knew that until recently. So not only is Art Rooney responsible for the Steelers, he's also at least partly responsible for the Penguins.
At least in the early years, yeah, he started the Penguins. Or helped start them. One of those. So he really is like a sports patriarch in this town. Like when people use that, you got to think he's responsible for more than just the Steelers. So much so that when he passed away in 1988, the county wanted to make his house a historical landmark. The Rooneys turned that down, and actually Dan moved back there, and that's where Dan lived until he passed away. So.
Yeah, and Art lived in that same house. It was on the north side. It was a pretty modest house. It was not not a mansion. It wasn't, anything like a gated community. I mean, if you look at NFL owners today, and even back then, I mean, NFL owners by that point, by the time Art died in 1988, NFL owners, the NFL was pretty big even back then, and he could have been living in, Fox Chapel or one of these nicer Pittsburgh neighborhoods. He just stayed in that same house on the north side.
Yeah, Dan ended up fixing it up and moving from, I guess he lived in Mount Lebanon. He moved back after Art died in 88. And he used to walk to the games. Dan used to walk to the games. So, like I said, like father, like son, it was, a real tribute to the Chief. Just another funny story. One time when he was in a hotel, the Chief was at a hotel in New York. A drunken party was next door to his room, and they were like real loud all night. And like I said, his routine was to get up at 5 a.m. and go and, clock the horses to set up his day at the track. Well, they kept him up, and I guess they were yelling anti-Semitic comments about about Jewish people all night. And so like when they finally went to bed at like 3 or 4, the Chiefs started like calling their room like every 5 minutes and asking for like Mr. Schwartz or Mr. Goldfarb, like obviously like Jewish sounding names just to mess with them. And so he did that for a while until he had to go to the track, and then he paid like the switchboard operator to keep doing it for like the next couple hours. Like I said, the Chief definitely liked to mess with people. It was
that's a side of him that you probably never hear about, right? Because it's just those aren't the things that were reported back then, or people would only know that from firsthand accounts.
Yeah, that was in his son's book. Or like I was reading Art Modell, like they were in Cleveland one time playing a game, and Art was like, I think it was in 95 when after Art had moved the team, or maybe, I don't know, they were losing, and Art was trying to like beat it out of there. He didn't want to get bothered. And like you hear somebody yelling, Art, Art, Art. And finally he turns around, and there it's the Chief, and the Chief like thumbs his nose at him just to mess with him. It's like who does this stuff? It's just being silly. Like I said, he talked to all the people. Another great thing that the Chief did was even the people that maybe he didn't get along with too well, like Al Davis, like that was definitely someone who was an arch rival of the Steelers, from the Immaculate Reception to competing with all those great teams in the 70s. And there was an incident between the Steelers and the Raiders where Chuck Atkinson knocked out Lynn Swann like on like I think it was like a clothesline. It was a really dirty, cheap shot hit. And so like after the game, like Chuck Noll said there was a criminal element in the NFL, referring to Chuck Atkinson and the Raiders. So Davis paid for George Atkinson to sue Chuck Noll in court for defamation, which, was just like horrible for the league and really bad. And it was just kind of like Al Davis too was suing the league because he wanted to move back. Did he want to move to Oakland or from Oakland? He was moving the Raiders to either LA or Oakland, and he was suing the league. So I think he just did this just to annoy the Rooneys. Well, even after all that, like Al Davis's wife got sick in like the early 80s, and the Chief sent her flowers and like encouraging notes, and he even visited her when she was in the hospital. So through all that, like this guy, like Al Davis is causing all these troubles and headaches, on the business side and somewhat on the personal with his organization. The Chief still found like, some humanity and just general all around the kindness. Treat people the way you want to be treated even if they aren't treating you the way you think they should. But I mean, it's just that I found that an interesting story.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And that's a hard thing to do when treating people that have rubbed you the wrong way in a way that's still loving. And that says a lot. Especially
in court. It was a court case. Yeah. Crazy. As far as the Chiefs' overall like conclusion and his ownership style, like we said, he didn't meddle. Like you said, he didn't have an ego. He let his coaches make the decisions. And unfortunately, the negatives were when he just kind of hired people on other people's words and didn't take the football too seriously. So the team suffered and was really bad. He let them constantly trade draft picks for veterans because the coaches liked veterans, didn't want to suffer through teaching, oh, I don't need no rookie screwing up where I can get a veteran. And, so that definitely lasted until Dan took over. And he definitely followed his golden rule there. He treated everybody the way he wanted to be treated. And you can see that really in the end it paid off. It was almost that Super Bowl 9 was the first one, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like a lifetime achievement trophy award for Art, the Chief. And definitely a good thing that happened to everybody in the league, wanted them to win. And you could see it, the appreciation of the players and even Pete Rozelle when they handed him that trophy there in, it was New Orleans.
Yeah, Joe Green is quoted as saying that was really their motivation for that first Super Bowl, was to get a championship for Mr. Rooney. And so even the players, really, that was, obviously they wanted to win for themselves, but they really wanted to win for the owner. And that's something, again, you wouldn't see a lot of today, probably.
No, not so much. It was definitely much more family, but definitely some good life lessons there. The Chief is a character. Between the boxing and harassing people and harassing racists in the next room, he definitely had fun in life, and definitely a good guy and a person you can draw some life lessons from. Anything else to add, Tim?
Well. So here's a good question, Steve. So he's this great guy. So first of all, I want to say this. Like, I think, when you talk about figures from that era, people that existed before the days of 24/7 media, there was a tendency to, kind of like make people into these mythical figures. If you like, Babe Ruth is a good example, right? Babe Ruth was, at the time, they would write these books about him and make these movies about him, where at the end of the movie he like donates his kidneys to a sick kid or something. And Babe Ruth wasn't like necessarily a bad person, but he, we know today that Babe Ruth drank a lot. He caroused around with women while he was married, but none of that stuff ever got reported because that wasn't the way the world was back then. You didn't report on that stuff. And I think with Art Rooney, if he would have been the same way, that stuff would have come out by now. You wouldn't have had all the people saying all the things about him even years later that knew him, that interacted with him on a daily basis. You wouldn't see the legacy carried on in his son and grandson the way it has been, and the love that people around the NFL have for Dan. You just wouldn't have that, right? So I think it's almost like, if he had any skeletons in the closet, I really don't think he did. I don't think there's some secret thing that nobody knew about, because it would have come out, or somebody would have said something, and you never hear a bad word ever about the Chief. So that just says a lot, right? That you just never hear a bad word.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to his character and the character of his person. And just to, like he just was like a funny kind of mess with people guy too,
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of took out of it. Not just, he was not kind of like a straight-laced guy, but I mean, the most scandalous thing I came across was, I guess he got involved with some slot machines before they were legal. Like, they were only supposed to dispense candy, but his were dispensing money. And Mayor Lawrence, Davy Lawrence, who was mayor way back when, found out about it and said, is this legal? And he said, I guess not. And Lawrence was like, I guess you know what to do. And he just like stopped doing it. So I mean, that's probably one of the more, I mean, he did do some stuff that maybe wasn't completely legal, but to his credit, when they told him to knock it off, he was like, nope, I'm done,
Yeah. And if that's the worst thing, I mean, hey, who of us hasn't dabbled in illegal slot machine gambling?
I don't think it's really that big of a deal. And the fact that, like, when he was called out on it, he was like, oh, okay, well, I'll just stop doing that then.
And the fact that he was called out on it and given the opportunity to just stop again says a lot about what because they could have prosecuted him or arrested him or whatever, and they chose not to. Here's another good question, Steve. So let's fast forward to today, right? Say you had an owner, an NFL owner, or even another sport, an owner that is this great guy, treats everybody well. There are stories of Art. He used to carry around $1 bills in his pocket to give to poor kids on the street, right? So say you had that kind of figure today, with, the way that Art ran the team for 40 years. He talked about that, and we did a whole episode about the dark ages of the Steelers, where they just made bad decision after bad decision and didn't win. I wonder what the reaction would be today if you had this really nice old guy owner that, kept losing every single year. You ever think about that? Like, how would the fans respond to that kind of thing today?
Well, it would be almost like if all of a sudden, like Bob Nutting and the Pirates all of a sudden just turned it around. And like in 2 years, all of a sudden they win like 2 or 3 World Series in a row. And then like maybe another 2 a couple years later. And then all of a sudden don't have a losing season. Like, because the same thing, like if you read some of the stuff, like the same things that are said about like Bob Nutting, like he's cheap, he doesn't want to pay, he's incompetent, like all that was said about the Chief, like when he was in his when they were losing in the 50s and 60s. It really, it's the same kind of argument. And, maybe, people didn't, fans are fans and they want to win every year. And, it's just, I guess, people cut him a little bit more slack because he was a nicer guy. But I mean, it's not like, that's the only thing I could think of. Like, I was thinking that, like, what if like that's to be the only analogy, like if all of a sudden the Pirates just got like really good and became like this really awesome team in baseball, like would people like turn it around for Bob Nutting and be like, hey, Bob Nutting, he's not that bad.
Well, yeah, and Bob Nutting doesn't have, decades of goodwill that he's engineered towards the city or towards people either, right? So like
I don't think he doesn't even live. He lives in West Virginia, doesn't he?
Right. So imagine if Mr. Rogers would have bought the Pirates in 2002 or in 1993, whenever they started to get really bad, right? Imagine if Mr. Rogers or some really loved figure bought the Pirates and then proceeded to make all the same terrible decisions that Pirates owners made, drafting all the wrong players and signing, making all the wrong decisions. Would people still be would that person that bought the team still be as loved as Mr. Rooney was? And to your point, would Mr. Rooney have been as loved had they not turned it around in the 70s and won all the Super Bowls? If they continue to stink all the way through the 70s and all the way until he dies in the late 80s, you just wonder. I just wonder if people would think of him differently or not.
Definitely winning. Well, I mean, he even said, like he said, when you lose, you're dumb, and when you win, you're smart. That was the Chief said that too. So, and there is something to that. People think like rich people, successful people have all the answers, and not necessarily. They've made their share of mistakes too, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah. But nevertheless, I mean, that's a whole what if scenario. Obviously what happened is, the team did turn things around. They became part of the consciousness here in Pittsburgh. I mean, the Steelers are just a treasure, a local treasure, right? And that really goes back to the Rooney family, and again, like you said, the way that Art conducted himself, the way he raised his sons and everybody else to conduct themselves. So obviously, very beloved figure, very, very remembered figure in the history of the city.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I mean, I've seen, if you see some of the internet, like not to cite an internet video where they took like 4 like championships, winning seasons, and I think MVP like on that the teams had, and they ranked all the 4 major professional sports: baseball, hockey, football, basketball. And like the Steelers were the second highest ranked football team, right behind the Cowboys, which I was kind of surprised, because they had so many bad losing seasons. And it just for fun, the Pirates were actually rated higher than the Patriots. They're 27, and I don't know how the Pirates pulled that off, but it's just, it speaks to his business acumen that the team even survived, and to his character that he was beloved as much as he was.
Yeah, it's neat to look back on him to learn some things we didn't already know. That whole sense of humor that he had. I think that's a cool thing that, again, people don't inherently know about. and realize that, it's rare, man, especially today. Anytime you build up somebody, they almost always fall. Whether it's Bill Cosby or Tiger Woods or whoever you thought was like this great, amazing figure, almost always, it seems like something ruins that view of them. And with our Rooney, I think that everything that's been said about him and written about him over the years, holds up under scrutiny years later.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Well, thanks for tuning in for the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. I'm Steve Wirt. Is Tim Hannon. What's our website again, Tim?
Yes, folks. So if you want to check out our website, it's pittsburghsportsmemories.weebly.com. We also are on Facebook and Twitter under Pittsburgh Sports Memories. So please go check us out there.
Thanks for listening.